Whistleblower claims Antarctica has an air traffic control station for UFOs and technology that can cause earthquakes. Trust me, you don't want to go anywhere. This dude's name is Eric Hecker, and in 2010 he was selected to go down to South Pole in Antarctica for work. Hired by a third-party contractor, he was brought on by the National Science Foundation. While there, he worked for Raytheon Polar Services for a year as a tradesman and a firefighter. As a leader, his responsibilities required him to know more than his crew, and he had access to any of the facilities there. And he believes that what he found out needs to be shared with the world. Here's what he found. While there, he worked at a place known as the Ice Cube Observatory, located in the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station. It's basically a particle detector that picks up a particle being emitted from the South Pole known as neutrinos. Neutrinos are the most abundant particle in the universe that have mass, though it is very small. So small, scientists still can't figure out their actual atomic weight. Every time atomic nuclei come together, like in the sun, or break apart, like in a nuclear reactor, they produce neutrinos. Even a banana emits neutrinos. They come from the natural radioactivity of the potassium in the fruit. Once produced, these ghostly particles almost never interact with other matter. Tens of trillions of neutrinos from the sun stream through your body every second, but you can't feel them. This is why scientists have such interest in them. They travel freely throughout the universe. So forces like magnetism or gravity have little to no effect on them as they move through the cosmos. You can use them to map things like the core of the sun, or even the death of a star or a planet being consumed by a black hole. But what they don't tell you is what else they can do and what else they're emitted from, which is where our God comes in. Unknown to the public, UFOs and exotic vehicles also emit vast amounts of neutrinos as they fly. So this basically makes the South Pole an air traffic control station for UFOs. He claims that they use this for both alien vehicles and our vehicles. He also says these neutrinos are being used for faster than light communication. It's believed that these neutrinos actually do travel faster than the speed of light, though this hasn't been proven as fact. So essentially, I believe what they think is that somehow the craft possibly could be using neutrinos to travel faster than the speed of light. They pretty much know that they're using them to communicate faster than the speed of light. But what's more baffling is the fact that they have no idea where these neutrinos that are being emitted in Antarctica are coming from. They've made a number of guesses, but none of them have really been accurate. They still don't know what's emitting these particles. Then he goes on to say something more concerning. What they use to read these particles and pick them up is mind-blowing. Behind me are pods known as DOMs, digital optical modules. Neutrinos have a very high penetration power, which means they pass through matter without interacting with it. But in rare cases, they can interact with the nuclei of the ice, at which point they produce charged particles of light known as Cherenkov radiation. This is what the DOMs pick up. They basically place 5,160 of these things up to 2,500 meters deep in the Antarctic ice. These DOMs can actually transmit electricity at 2,047 volts each. And Eric Hecker makes a startling claim about these. He claims that when he was there in 2010 and 2011, they went from construction to operations and maintenance, meaning they fired it up. This was both in the elevated portion and the detector array. But upon firing it up, it took them 2 different shots before they were able to target it correctly. Then he states that the initial 2 startups caused an earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. So they've basically discovered that this is an earthquake generating device as well, that they can be used as a weapon of war. From then on, the military-industrial complex had a heightened interest in what goes on down there. There's another place there called the Clean Air Sector, the Atmospheric Research Observatory. He witnessed a direct energy green laser being fired out of this observatory into the cosmos.
Watch this.
What the is that, dude? What? That's it.
It's believed this is a secondary form of communication and/or weapon of war. And it doesn't stop there. He also found out there's an energy source being used there that dates back to before the Antarctic Treaty. He was never actually able to find out the source of this energy, but he believes it to be nuclear, which is mind-blowing because this is basically right around World War II. So could it have been the Germans? Possibly, but unlikely. It's thought to be exotic or extraterrestrial. And the reason they use this source and are able to is simply because it's not in the verbiage of the treaty.
This guy was on the Sean Ryan show, and he
he's explaining how he went down there and he read the operating manual for this device, and this device caused the earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand. I was like, what?
I physically held a key that opened every single door in the facility. I had complete access to every compartment they manufactured.
What are you blowing the whistle on?
That there are technologies at the South Pole Station that people can't even consider that exist on this planet. Directed energy weapon systems is something that people need to get into their vocabulary fast. The Ice Cube neutrino detector is not simply a passive listening device as presented for the science that they're claiming it to do. It also has the capacity to transmit. There are embedded in the ice what are called digital optical modules, DOMs. They're about the size of a basketball. The array embedded in the ice is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. It is the world's largest telescope, and now because we have proven that it can transmit, it's the world's largest directed energy weapon system.
But that's the facility on top of it, and whoa, look what happens under the ground. Yeah. Holy shit. What?
I've never really believed in Jesus or done the whole church thing. But I think I've seen the stuff you guys are talking about here. I just didn't know what it was at the time. I was in the Army from 1997 to 2000, and I was sent to McMurdo Station in Antarctica. I was a helicopter mechanic and crew chief, and they had volunteer tours open for guys to go there and work on the helicopters there. When they asked for volunteers, a bunch of us applied, but only me and one other guy got accepted. The application process had a bunch of questionnaires that we had to fill out, and we had to sit for a bunch of one-on-one interviews. It was mostly just a bunch of questions about what our interests and beliefs were. I was sent to McMurdo Research Station in August of 1998. When we weren't busy de-icing the aircraft and working on them, we had time to hang out with the scientists at the research station. The military unit attached to McMurdo was small, and we didn't have our own separate facilities. We didn't have a PX or a media center. There was no chapel or chaplain, and we didn't have our own separate mailroom. We just had to share the same facilities with the scientists and researchers. So over time I got to be friends with a few of them. They had 2 different kinds of ice that they worked on and studied. One kind of ice was the normal kind that we've all seen. They took cores of it out of boreholes in the ground. Just like normal ice, it was mostly clear or sometimes white, and it would melt into liquid water if it got warm. The whole area of Antarctica is covered in this kind of ice. But that wasn't their main kind of ice. The only time I ever saw them actually studying normal ice was when a film crew from National Geographic came by. The rest of the time, which was most of the time, the scientists were studying something they called sky ice. This stuff was totally different. We were never allowed to go into the laboratory areas of the station because the labs had to be kept super clean, and they said it would mess up their work if they risked letting too many people in the lab. But one time, one of the researchers that I was friends with showed me a piece of sky ice. You couldn't touch the stuff with your bare hands because it was so cold. And it wasn't clear or white like normal ice. It was solid blue. He said that's why they call it sky ice, because it was the exact same color as the sky. We had to wear thick, heavy, going outside gloves to handle it. So I asked my friend where they get the sky ice from, and he said it comes from the wall. I don't remember exactly how he described it, but apparently there's a huge wall of sky ice in Antarctica. He said it was hundreds of miles inland from the coast. I never got to see it myself because I was only stationed to McMurdo. I didn't get to go out on expeditions. He said it was the biggest natural structure in the world. He said that in the 1960s, the US Army had a plan to bore a tunnel into the wall, but they didn't have a boring machine that could handle super cold temperatures. So they had a whole testing project in Greenland where they developed ice tunnels and invented new boring machines that could operate in super cold temperatures. Like, they did this whole big thing in Greenland just for practice. I'm not an expert on that, but that's just what he told me. Then once they had the new boring machine figured out, they brought it to the wall in Antarctica. He said that the machine bored a tunnel. I don't remember exactly, like 5 or 10 miles into the wall, but that they never broke through the other side of the wall, and that they still don't know how thick the wall is even to this day. And I'm probably not remembering this part correctly, but I think he said that at first, the floor of the tunnel was a solid rock, but after a mile or 2 in, the floor was sky ice. Like it was sky ice underneath after a certain point, or something like that. And apparently, the wall slowly builds itself back up after you cut it, because after a year or so, the tunnel had shrunk smaller all by itself. They had to leave the boring machine inside the wall because the tunnel shrunk too small to get it back out. And after a few decades, the tunnel was completely gone. Like that part of the wall was solid again. He said that now the scientists were trying to use technology to figure out how thick the wall is. He said something about putting earthquake sensors all along the wall, and that somehow you could measure the signal from an earthquake to see how thick the wall is, but he kind of lost me on that part. I never really thought about any of that after I left. It was really weird stuff, but I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. But then a few weeks ago I saw a map of the wall in Antarctica. Except the map was all flat and crazy looking, and it showed the wall going all the way up to the whole Earth. So since then, I've been trying to learn more about the sky ice that I saw, and the wall that I heard about, but I can't find anything at all. So now I'm really wondering if there could be a connection here, and that's how I found this group. So I hope that maybe some part of my experience will help someone figure something out.
With his gloves, of course, noting that it was lighter than regular ice, almost like he could have thrown it up in the air and it would have floated back down. It was also slightly flexible and completely opaque, so you couldn't see through it at all. And it didn't even melt into water when it got warm, but just continually shrank until it ceased to exist, likely turning directly into oxygen gas. Which is why they had to study it in Antarctica. They couldn't even transport it to anywhere in the world before it disappeared. The Russians knew about this too, and it's part of the reason they all have research stations down there. After 15 minutes or so, the sky ice was almost completely gone, and Jimmy asks his research friend where they even get this ice from. And this is where it gets interesting. Because to that, the scientist replied, they get it from the wall. According to him, if you go deep enough, hundreds of kilometers inland from the coast, you'll run into a huge wall in Antarctica that contains this sky ice, the biggest natural structure in the world. This sounds a lot like the infamous ice wall from the, pancake Earth theory, which states there's a giant wall of ice that surrounds our entire planet, and there's even more land beyond this wall if you somehow manage to get past it.
Is Antarctica a continent? Or is it an ice wall encompassing the level Earth that we live on, containing the water? Because water always needs a container and always lays level, dude. Like, everybody knows this, right? Water on a lake, water in the sea, water in a pool. Let's see, level at the top. It's all level, okay? And then you've got this. Like, big problems, guys. No container and no level water on this curved, oblate, spheroid, ellipsoid, pear, whatever you guys believe it is. And by the way, this is CGI. This isn't a photograph. This is an image produced from a computer. Big difference, guys. Big difference. But anyway, if you didn't know, we don't have a working flat Earth model because 1, we're not allowed to go to the North Pole, and 2, we're not allowed to go past the 60th south latitude right here. And you can see the maximum penalty down here in the red box. I know some of you guys are real thick. You really want a spoon-fed to you. This is the Antarctic Treaty. The provisions of the present treaty shall apply to the area south of the 60th south latitude, including all ice shelves. Keep reading if you please. Also, is there a dome out there? The firmament? Dome, Valkyrie Dome, Dome Argus, Dome A, Dome C. No idea if there's a dome. Again, we're not allowed to go out there. But do you guys know who Captain Cook is? And you probably haven't heard about James Clark Ross, because the indoctrination camps we all went through, we call public school, definitely didn't teach me about him. They circumnavigated the Antarctic wall. It took them 3 to 4 years on a boat, and they tracked 60,000 miles. And again, this thing's supposed to only have a shoreline of 11 to 12,000. How did they manage to go 60? Why would they lie to us? Do you know how much resources could be out here? Oil, fish, food? Maybe they're not being ran by pedophiles?
What is this place? A rainforest in Antarctica? Am I dreaming?
No, Charles, it is real. It's called the Savage Land, a valley hidden in perpetual mist, created eons ago for a purpose long forgotten.